Hello class, this is a video tutorial on solving quadratics by completing the square. In this video we're just going to go through all examples and hopefully you can follow along. You can pause the video at any point and give it a go yourself. Here we go. So in order to do this we need to have a monic, so coefficient of 1 in x squared, which is here. But now we need to isolate the coefficient, the constant, and then now we need to add half of the b coefficient squared, so it's going to be 25, adding 25 to both sides. This will give me that gives me 1 on the right hand side, and x plus 5 all squared on the left hand side. Just a reminder, what goes inside the bracket here is always going to be half this coefficient. Okay, we take the square root of both sides, we get x plus 5 equals plus or minus 1. This will give us x equals negative 5 plus or minus 1. Let's solve this. This x equals negative 4 on the positive, and x equals negative 6 with the negative 1. Okay. That's the first example. Let's move right along. Here we go. So it's already got a monic coefficient. It's already got a 1. Let's isolate the constant. Positive 32. We take half of this coefficient and we square it. So half of 4 is 2. 2 squared is 4, and we add that to both sides. We factor this. It's always going to be half of this coefficient. So it's going to be plus 2 all squared. Evaluating this gives me 36. Taking the square root of both sides, positive or minus 6, x equals negative 2 plus or minus 6. This will give me x equals 4 if we do negative 2 plus 6, and x equals negative 8 if we do negative 2 take away 6. Here we go. This is slightly getting harder now, because we have an odd number b coefficient. It doesn't make a difference. We still follow through with the steps. X minus 13 equals negative 42. So that should be x. And once again, we still add half of negative 13. So we're going to add half of negative 13 squared. And we do that to this other side as well. So we're going to add half of that negative 13 squared. And as I said, what goes in the bracket here is always going to be half of that coefficient. So it's going to be negative 13 on 2 all squared. This one's very hard to evaluate, but let's just use a calculator here. This is negative 42 plus negative 13 on 2 all squared. That gives me 1/4. Taking the square root of both sides, we get x negative 13 on 2. Now if we take the square root of a fraction, we take the square root of 1. Sorry, hang on, it's going to be plus or minus 1 all over square root of 4 is 2. Okay, so now let's move it to the right hand side. X equals positive 13 on 2 plus or minus a half. Now they both have the same denominator, so we can just add it. So 13 plus 1 is 14 divided by 2. 14 divided by 2 is 7. If we take 13 take away 1, 13 take away 1 is 12 divided by 2 is 6. Let's keep moving here. Just a reminder again, you can pause the video at any time and give it a go yourself. In this one, we need to get a monic coefficient, so let's divide everything by 2. So it'll be x squared plus, there's a 1 here, so it's going to be half x minus a half equals 0. Isolating the constant, now adding half of this coefficient squared, so we're going to add half of a half is a quarter squared. Okay, we're going to add that again, 1/4 squared to both sides. Factoring the left hand side, it's always going to be half of this coefficient, so it's x plus 1/4 squared. Okay, this one once again is very tricky, so I'm just going to use my calculator on this. Half plus 1/16, I think it is. Half plus 1/4 all squared. 9/16. Okay, take the square root of both sides, we get x plus 1/4. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of 16 is 1/4, and it's always positive or negative. It's going to be x negative 1/4, moving this on, plus or minus 3/4. Let's solve this one. X equals, they both have the same denominator, so we can just think of this as -1 plus 3 is 2. 2/4 is 1/2. This one, I'll break it down so you can see what I'm doing. So -1/4. In this one, we took the positive. In this one, we're going to take the negative 3/4. This will give us -4/4, which is -1. X equals -1. Moving right along, I'm just going to write a little bit of a divider here. Okay, and let's get going with this next example. Once again, you can pause the video at any time and give it a go yourself. Here we go. Once again, we need to get a monic coefficient, so we need to divide everything by 3. So we get x squared plus 3x minus 10 equals 0. X squared plus 3x, isolating the constant. We're going to add half of this squared, so 3/2 squared. Factorize this, it's always going to be half of the inside there. Evaluating this, this gives us 10 plus 3/2 squared, 49/4. This gives us x plus 3/2 equals square root of 49 is 7, square root of 4 is 2. This gives us x equals -3/2 plus or minus 7/2. This takes the positives. Let's do 3/2 plus 7/2. This gives us -3/2 plus 7/2 gives us just 2. X equals -3/2 minus 7/2. Negative 3 minus 7 is 10. Negative 10 on 2 is negative 5. One last example. Dividing out everything by 6. Now this one's going to be the hardest one, but you can give it a go yourself at any time. Dividing everything by 6, we get x squared minus 27 on 6 x plus 5 equals 0. X squared minus 27 on 6x equals negative 5. Actually, I'm going to simplify 27 on 6 just to make our numbers a little bit easier. They can both be divided by 3. It's going to be 27, it's going to be 9 on 2x. The reason why I'm doing that is because I'm going to add half of 9 on 2 is 9 on 4 squared. I'm going to add that to both sides. Inside this bracket is always going to be this coefficient, half of negative 9 on 2, so it's going to be negative 9 on 4 all squared equals negative 5 plus negative 9 on 4 all squared, 1/16. Taking the square root of both sides, this gives us 1 on 4. And lastly, this gives us x equals 9 on 4 plus 1, plus or minus 1 on 4. If we take the positive, this will give us 10 on 4, 10 on 4, which simplifies down to x equals 5 on 2, or 2.5. And lastly, this gives us x equals 9 on 4 minus 1 on 4. This will give us 8 on 4. That's just easy. X equals 2. I know that was a long video, but I hopefully I gave you plenty of examples on how to complete the square and solve quadratics using that method. Best of luck!